Alrighty, so training the muscular system today. This is going to be your eighth PowerPoint here on day 9. So objectives today. I want to describe the basic principles when it comes to developing strength, right? So we are going to be talking a little bit about strength and hypertrophy, both types of muscle gain and stuff. We're going to talk about the differences between like aerobic power, which obviously does play a role when it comes to strength, versus like anaerobic strength, which is sort of what we often actually think of. When you think of like supplying your muscles with energy, you are probably picturing anaerobic metabolism, right? Glycolysis, lactic acid buildup, but then like, letting it sit. We'll talk a little bit about like the difference between like the aerobic side, oxidative in our muscles, because you can do that as well. I mean, obviously, you see those videos of people doing like, what is the world? I wonder what the world record is. What do you guys think? What do you guys think the over under? Give me an over under. We'll play prices right here. What do you guys think the world record for most push-ups is? We'll do a little gambling here in the morning.
300.
300.
It's gotta be more than that. It's gotta be something crazy. Like, but what are the conditions? Like most push-ups in like a minute?
We're gonna see the Guinness record for the most consecutive push-ups.
I gotta go with like 400, 500, maybe.
400, maybe 500. Simon, what you got?
1,500.
All right, let's go. All right, let's take a look. Dion, what do you think?
550.
550. All right. Down here, $1, Bob.
I'll raise that to 600.
All right. Push ups ever done. What? No, that's impossible. The world record, 10,000? There's no way.
No way.
I mean,
Yes,
there was
there's
no,
no
Not
way.
straight. Not straight.
I mean, what about those people that ran 300 miles? I mean,
It says nonstop.
That's no. I got to see a video of this guy. His name's all right.
You need proof?
I got it. I shouldn't have started the recording. I got to. Here's the most push-ups in 1 hour. Yeah, that's got to be fake. Yeah, there's no way. But Guinness record for most in an hour. Let's see what that is. Because Guinness has to like watch, they got a guy. It's so funny. Like you always see the Guinness officials just chilling. What did it come out to? 2,682 in an hour. Well, that's getting sloppy. Still though, I mean, better than I can do. So, most of the time we're talking about strength, we're talking about anaerobic strength, but clearly there's definitely, I would say that's greater than 2 minutes in strength there. 10,000, there's no way. Most people can't take 10,000 steps in a day. All right, so we're going to talk about the differences there. We will also outline concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions today. I'm going to be talking about tempos when it comes to like lifting and stuff. We will also talk a little bit about the new approach to tempos that we're seeing in NASM textbooks now. NASM has started to adopt the 4-number method when it comes to exercise tempos. Typically, we tend to see like a 3-number method, but they are starting to sort of incorporate that 4 methods. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about a couple different methods to measure muscular strength, the ones that are applicable in like a lab setting, or the ones that are actually like much more applicable to us, which is going to be just in a gym setting. Resistance training variables, how to train the nervous system to develop strength. And then we will talk about the differences between like hypertrophy and hyperplasia and the best ways to develop hypertrophy. Some of the cardiorespiratory adaptations that do come along with strength training, because yes, you do develop your cardiorespiratory system, even if you are just a power lifter. Like even if you never go over 5 reps, there are still some cardiorespiratory benefits there. Not as good as like doing more, but like it still exists. common mistakes that happen during flexibility training. And at the very end today, we'll talk a little bit about some of the fun ways to do assisted stretching techniques. So it's going to be a little preview into capstone. However, it's not something we're going to do a ton of, but you guys might be looking into the future to see. Oh, I did put it in the notes actually. What we're going to be doing the next time we meet up, which is kind of fun. Hint, hint. So we got a lot to go over today. It's going to be fun. Let's talk about some of the principles related to developing muscular strength. So when we say strength, what we mean is the amount of force that your muscles can exert against a resistance. And, if we define force, right? Force is an entity, whatever entity, interacting on like another one, and the amount of like energy that it's transferring to some other something, that is the force. You can see why I don't teach physics. But that's so in your muscles are going to generate an internal amount of tension, and then that internal tension is going to be able to overcome some type of external force, right? So I got my glass of water here, right? So this probably weighs, I don't know, 1.5 pounds maybe. Probably not actually. But I can, if I can track my muscles for more than 1.5 pounds, I can raise it to my face without having to splash it directly into my face by contracting too hard, right? And that's what's kind of cool about muscular force. So as we're looking at it, and we'll see this later down in the PowerPoint, the way that your muscles generate that internal tension, you guys might remember that we talked about motor units, right? So when we were talking about like motor units, that's a single neuron and all the fibers that it zaps, right? So when your muscle fibers contract, they contract fully as hard as they can every single time, right? They will always contract for the most force that they are able. Now, when you hear that, it might be like, well, then how do you lift the water to your face without, hitting yourself as hard as you can? Like if your muscle fibers contract as hard as they can, how is it that you're not constantly just ripping the door off the hinges, and the way that happens is because when we look at like motor unit recruitment, order, what happens, looking for a chart here, there we go, is that your body will try to recruit the smallest motor units first to get the job done. And if it doesn't really happen, then they'll recruit the next ones. And if it doesn't happen, they'll recruit the next ones. And it sort of goes in order, right? It's kind of like, it's almost like bargaining, right? It's like, I'll give you $5. It's like, nah, it's not gonna be enough. You can't buy it. It's like, all right, what about $10? What about $15? Like eventually you get there, right? And that's kind of how it works. So you go to pick up like a heavy weight and your body goes, let's try 5 motor units. And it's like, that's not enough. So then you try 10, then you try 15, you try 20, until eventually it's enough to get it, up off the ground, which is why when we're trying to develop strength, it's so important to recruit as many motor units as possible. And today we're going to be talking about motor unit recruitment. So that really is sort of like what strength is. And then like, depending on how many motor units you have to recruit however many muscle fibers, and that's going to determine how much strength you have. And so muscular strength is the amount of force that a muscle can generate, to overcome some type of external resistance. If it's a 45-pound, dumbbell, then you got to generate at least 45 pounds of internal tension to be able to move it. So there are a lot of factors that kind of come in when it comes to strength here. We do see, for instance, we are going to see, your contractile proteins being present, right? You got to make sure that you have like enough fibers running throughout like your muscles, right? If you see like a muscle fiber and a myofibril, right? So like your muscle fiber is the cell itself, which we're seeing here, right? That's the entire cell. And then look, you can see special little proteins inside. Those are all the myofibrils. And then when you look at a myofibril, you'll see the overlapping layers of the proteins. You can see there's a little actin strand in green, and then there's a big thick myosin strand in, I guess, purple maroon there in the center, right? And so those are going to shorten. This section is going to shorten. That section is going to shorten. That section is going to shorten. The whole myofibril is going to shorten. And then all the myofibrils are going to shorten simultaneously. And then that's going to contract that muscle cell. But maybe the one next to it isn't being recruited. So that's how your body's kind of controlling that strength. So how well your body is able to synthesize new contractile proteins, make new actin, make new myosin, that's going to determine your strength. Muscle fiber type is a big part of that, right? We talk about type 2 fibers, which have a lot of contractile proteins and a lot of cellular fluid to give it energy. Whereas type 1 muscle fibers don't have as many proteins, they have more mitochondria and less cellular fluid. So they much more rely on the aerobic metabolism and being a little bit smaller. Gender difference is going to play a role here. The point of your tendon insertion is actually a big part of this. That is a huge part of strength. So showing you guys like a little bit of like biology here, one of the ways that I know that I really am much more of a type 1 athlete, I've got these big long tendons and kind of short stumpy muscles, and you can actually kind of see that if you look at my arm. Look at the gap between like my bicep and my elbow. Filling that gap in is very determined by your genetics. Some people, their bicep will go the whole way down, you know, and so they've got a lot of muscle, which is contractile, instead of a lot of tendon, which is really just meant to have a good grip. So again, that's a little bit of genetics, kind of fun. Little bit of difference there. Now, doesn't mean that I can't build it up, right? But like filling in that gap, it probably isn't in the cards for me unless it, you know, a lot of like very specific training. And I'll tell you now, it's not going to happen. I don't really particularly care too hard about like doing a lot of arm stuff. I much prefer compound movements. So then we've also got like neurological activation, your nervous system's ability to zap those muscle fibers. So again, developing more motor units, more neurons that can actually do that. That is a big part of strength as well. One of the cool things about your nervous system is that you have a lot of these extra little nervous system cells that we call neuroglia. And we used to think that they were just kind of there to act as like a buffer, but we're starting to realize more and more they're kind of like nerve cells that can become whatever it is they need to become. So the more you train, the more your neuroglia goes, all right, well, let's turn this into a full neuron. We need to be able to zap more muscle fibers. So you can create more motor units, and that's great. That's another thing that's going to determine your strength. And then hormonal factors. One of the reasons why, big difference between the genders, you know, big difference between the sexes rather, is that we've got men do produce a lot more, about 10 times as much testosterone, which often results in larger myofibrils and actin and myosin protein synthesis. And that's not necessarily true in the entire animal kingdom, you know. A lot of times, like you know, the female in a species will actually be like a lot larger. The weirdest example I can think of, but that is very true of spiders, actually. When I was a kid, we used to sell, my parents owned a pet store. We used to sell rose hair tarantulas at the pet store, big old, the ones you always see in the movies. And, you know, the females were way bigger than the males. And they have to be because like, that's actually, you know, the male can be a really good food source if the female is, you know, expecting to lay like a whole bunch of little ones. And so like they will straight up murder the male afterwards and then like use it for food in a couple weeks. Fun weird biology fact for the day. So they need to be a lot bigger, you know. So there's in us, there's the hormonal differences kind of play a big factor there, but in lots of the other parts of the world, that's maybe not the case. So that's your muscular strength in general. So let's go ahead and start breaking down the things that we can do to sort of lay this out. So when we are looking at muscle contractions, okay, so we got 3 types of contractions that we can make. We've got concentric contractions, eccentric contractions, and isometric contractions. So concentric contractions are whenever you're contracting a muscle and causing the muscle to shorten. So when you see concentric contractions are probably what you think of when you think of contraction, like it's sort of what pops into our head. You know, it's like, oh, I'm contracting because I'm overcoming I'm squeezing the muscle. I'm moving something from point A to point B. But that's not the only type of contraction you've got. It's just the one that we tend to think of the most. So concentric contractions are the type of contractions that occur when the muscle fibers shorten and pull together, right? So what's happening is the muscle is generating internal tension that is greater than whatever resistive force it's dealing with. So I've got a 5-pound dumbbell in my hand. I generate 5.5 pounds of force. Whoop, and I can overcome it, right? So the muscle can shorten. You can think of this as force production, right? So you think about like jumping, you're producing force to explosively overcome gravity, right? You're shortening your muscles, right? So when we lay out tempo in your textbook, you will see it listed. Like if we look at like the NASM acute variables, right? So pulling up the stabilization rules, right? Remember I told you yesterday, we've got those tables in our textbook that have kind of all of our physiologic rules. It's a great way to apply physiology. And you can see this tempo here. A lot of times it just says slow, might say 3 to 5 seconds hold, right? Moderate. But here we see a number. We see 4 and then 2 and then 1. What those numbers refer to is they go in order, and they always go in this order. So it doesn't matter what exercise it is, guys. We always label it in the same order. So I know, like, if I had a dumbbell in my hand, the first part of the contraction would be the concentric part, right? Like I would first do this, and then I would pause for maybe a second in between where I isometrically hold, and then I would lower it back down, right? So you might think that that means it's like, oh, well, you do the concentric part first, the isometric part second, the eccentric part third. 1, 2, 3, right? But that's not how it works. We don't label it that way. We don't make the assumption of where the client is going to start, because we don't know how people are going to count their reps. You know, do you count your shoulder press from, you know, that's 1, or do you go 1, 2? I have no idea how people are going to count out their reps. So instead, the way this works, guys, is that we always, when we're laying out tempo, we always go like this. We go 4/2/1. Actually, no, I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go X/X. So that kind of represents a general tempo there. Actually, we actually use XXX. That actually means explosive, or as fast as possible. Let's put that there. So when we're looking at this, right, this one right here is always going to represent the eccentric part of the lift. Okay, so the eccentric part of the lift is always going to be the first number listed. So if it tells you to do it for 3 seconds, you're going to do a 3-second eccentric. If it tells you to do it for 4 seconds, you're going to do a 4-second eccentric. That's how this works, right? So here we've got, let's say this is the middle one. That is an isometric part of the lift. Always. And then we've got the third number here. This is the concentric part of the lift. So this is the one we're talking about right now. We're talking about the concentric part of the lift. This is the muscle contraction that you tend to think of. That's the muscle shortening to overcome a resistance, right? So eccentric is the first number, isometric is the second number, concentric is the third number. And I'll talk about the fourth number that they're starting to incorporate here in just a moment. But that is sort of where we're at for right now. So if it was listed as 4-2-1, right? If this said 4 and this said 2 and this said 1, then I would eccentrically go for 4 seconds. So if I was doing like a preacher curl, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I've got 1, you know, it's 4-2-1. The next part of my lift is going to be concentric, right? So I'm going to go 1. And then I've got a 2-second isometric. 1, 2. So it would look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. If it was a shoulder press, 1, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's such a weird thing to do. I'm just here in my room alone, counting to myself. This is how people go crazy. I'm glad you guys are with me. So that is that's our tempo, right? That's how we lay this out. So concentric contractions are always going to be that third number there, right? And I'm going to change that from final to third. It's going to be the third number, okay? In addition to that, we've got, so like I said, this is responsible for the majority of contractions in the body, right? Like most of the time you're doing concentric, right? So in resistance training, there's really not very many exercises that require that don't require concentric contractions. As you can see here, it says essentially all strength movements, right? Obviously, that's not 100% true. You can do a wall sit, right, where you're just sitting in one spot. You're not shortening your muscles, you're just leaving them in one position. That's isometric. There's a plank, Superman's, where maybe you just might hold. And then sometimes there's like strictly eccentric exercises out there. They're pretty rare, but like there are some. Has anybody in here ever tried to do like a negative exercise, like a negative pull-up? It's where you use like a chair or something to take yourself up to the bar. So you step up to the bar, and then you take your feet off, and then you just lower yourself to the ground. And then you step back on the bar, hold it there, and then lower yourself back down to the ground. So that's a negative pull-up. It's a really great way to learn how to do pull-ups. If you can't do a pull-up right now, learning how to do negatives is a great place to start. I'll even have my clients, a lot of clients who have a really hard time switching from like modified knee push-ups to like a full push-up, like on the toes. A lot of times it's just a form fix, and they just need to kind of teach their brain how to do it. So what I'll have them do is I will have them do a negative push-up, which basically looks like this. So they'll do, should be able to see me. They'll do, they'll go on their knees, right? And that helps them push up. And then they'll go to their toes. They'll take themselves down to the floor slowly, all the way to the floor, bring their knees up, do the modified push-up, and then go back to their toes. And that's a really good way to learn how to get into an actual push-up. It's a good way to sort of like make that transition, because that transition can be really hard for people sometimes. And I'll have people do that in group exercise as well. And if like, let's say I'm like, all right, we're gonna do 60 seconds of push-ups, and half of my boot camp is like, hey, I can't do 60 seconds of push-ups, right? It's like they have two options. They can do as many as they can, maybe take 20 seconds of rest in between, try to step back in at the very end, or they can, after they get tired of doing full push-ups, they can do negative modified push-ups. Simon, do you have a question?
Oh, I was just gonna bring up the machine that they have at the gym. It's kind of like a guided pull-up.
Yeah.
The most weight, it's actually helping you.
Yep. So that still allows you to kind of go up and down the whole time. That's also very, very helpful. That's why people use like resistance bands on a pull-up bar sometimes. You see it in CrossFit gyms all the time. Those are both really good options for getting better at pull-ups as well. But a negative is a little bit different. It's just where you only do the eccentric portion, and also I guess a little bit isometric, but negative pull-up. You can see the way this works, or sometimes people will like jump
Patrick and Aaron
up to the thing. Skipping forward. Giant explanation. Giant explanation. So you see he jumped himself up, he's pulling, and then he's just letting himself down very slowly. That letting down, he's lengthening his muscles. That's the eccentric contraction. So then he jumps up again, isometric, and then slowly eccentric on the way down. Both those are really good. And I like those pull-up machines. I think they can be really effective. However, I will say about the pull-up machine, one of the problems with it is that it doesn't really require you to have to use your core at all. And honestly, that's a big problem that a lot of people have with pull-ups, is that their core will engage the wrong way and they start to tilt. And then all of a sudden they can't get up over the bar. So it does, I think it's a good way if you are really focused on using the right type of strength, like your lats and stuff. But try to transition off that machine, maybe into a resistance band, work on your hanging leg raises and things like that as well for core strength, while you're kind of doing that to kind of fill in any of the gaps. So next one we've got type of contractions. We've got eccentric contractions. They're the opposite of concentric. This is where you are lengthening a muscle. So the contractile proteins are contracting for less force than a resistance, right? So contractions that occur when the muscle is lengthening, the muscle is generating less internal tension than whatever resistance. So if you had, if you had 10 pounds in your hand and you generated 9 pounds of force, and so your arm is lowering down, the muscles are being lengthened. That is an eccentric contraction. We can think of concentric as force production or acceleration. We can think of eccentric as force reduction or deceleration. The muscle is lengthening. You think about like when you're sprinting and you're slowing down, right? Hitting the brakes, right? You're kind of like lengthening out, your muscles as you kind of like go through each step there. That is eccentric, right? This, by the way, eccentric contractions have been shown to be the most associated with what we call delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS. It is what you guys are very familiar with if you work out. 24 hours later, 48 hours later, especially, you get that really intense sort of soreness that kind of comes in, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm sore after my workout. And then like the next day you're like, oh, I'm really sore today. But then the next day you're like, oh, I'm really sore today, right? It's like that second day soreness is so much worse. We don't really fully understand DOMS. We don't really understand it at all, actually. Kind of fun. We still got to figure that out. But it's very heavily associated with eccentric contractions. If you do a lot of eccentrics, you're gonna be sore. So then lastly, we've got isometric contractions. Isometric contractions are in the middle, right? So these are contractions that occur when your muscle's not lengthening or shortening. Oh, shoot, and hold on. Number wise, that is the eccentric. That is the first number in the list. So again, it starts eccentric whenever we list that. So if this was a 4, we'd do a 4-second eccentric. If it was a 2, we'd do a 2-second eccentric. So if it's like 2, 2, 2, that'd be a 2-second eccentric, 2-second isometric, 2-second concentric. If it was 2, 0, 2, it would be 2 seconds eccentric and 2 seconds concentric with 0 seconds isometric. So no pausing. You just want to move the whole time. So that is eccentric contractions. Isometric contractions occur when the muscle's not shortening or lengthening. It is staying the same length here, right? So your muscle is generating equal amount of tension. If I took a 5-pound dumbbell and I generated 5 pounds of force, I would hold my arm in this position. If I pulled it here, I would hold it in that position, right? I'm just holding it in whatever spot I want. That's an isometric contraction. Okay, so your muscle length stays constant. Planks, wall sits, if you're doing a Superman hold, all of those are very good examples of isometrics. So we've got force production with concentric, force reduction with eccentric. This is force stabilization. It's the middle pausing number. And this is a really big, important part of training that we don't give enough attention to. You guys may have heard me say this before in other classes, but like, a lot of people, when they think exercise, they think movement, and that's great because it is. Exercise is a lot of movement, right? But it's not just movement. I would argue that learning how to exercise well is just as much about not moving as it is about moving. And what I mean when I say not moving, I don't mean like hanging out on the couch, or taking a nap. I mean, like, it's just about like it's just as much about resisting unwanted movement. Like if I'm doing a handstand, I need to be able to like hold my shoulders in the correct position, and make sure that like I'm stable in my rotator cuff. If it moves in an unwanted way, I might pull a muscle, I might tear a muscle, I might damage the joint, if something slides out of position, if all my discs are stacked and then one of them slides, I might herniate a disc, right? So creating stabilization in my core to resist any unwanted movement, or at least movement that I didn't necessarily like want to do, right? If I do that, I'm likely to end up with some type of injury. So that's the force stabilization isometric stuff. One thing of note, isometric exercises do dramatically increase your blood pressure because of the amount of tension they generate. So if your client has high blood pressure, you probably shouldn't be doing very many isometrics. We all love planks. It's a great exercise. I don't do it if my client has hypertension. It just causes like way too much spiking, and they have already got blood pressure issues. So kind of a safety thing, but honestly, it's also just like not training them effectively. So instead, we want to increase blood flow to the area so that their body can actually like use like, oh, blood vessel dilation and constriction. They can actually use that. Best way to do that is to keep the muscle moving, which is what we really like with our hypertensive clients. So quick little note there for those of you, this is going to become important later on this module when we talk about like our weight loss stuff. Obese individuals tend to have extremely high blood pressure. So that is the sort of approach to tempo. Now, there is a new one that is coming down the line. The new way that they are laying out exercise tempo. And by new, oh shoot, hold on. People have been doing this for quite some time actually, but it's new to NASM. NASM used to not take this approach. Now they're kind of falling in line with everybody else. So this is the new version of laying out tempo. There is now a fourth number that is often being listed. That fourth number is the second isometric. Okay, it's the second isometric, or pause between, or you can think of it as the pause between reps. So you might be thinking, right, when I was laying out the tempo, I said, like, if I was doing a 4-2-1 with the bicep curl, right, 4-2-1 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2. Eccentric, concentric, isometric, eccentric, right? We'll pause in there, right? That's the current way we list it out, but it doesn't address, well, what about when I'm down here, right? We addressed when I'm under tension, isometrically squeezing. What about when I'm isometrically like stabilizing down here? The pause between reps, right? That's the fourth number that they're starting to incorporate in the new editions of the textbook. So that fourth number is the second part of the isometric, or it's the time but in between a rep, right? So in a squat, it would be it'd be like, if it was 4-2-1, it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1. And if it was a 2, I would hold up here for 2 before doing my next one. So chances are you're going to see a 4-2-1-2 tempo is what it often is. So like 4-2-1-2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Or if it was just like 1, 1, 1, 1, that's a very general tempo. You'll see it's like you're lifting like this. That's a 1, 1, 1, right? Basically 1 second in each position. Biggest tempos you're going to see. NASM really doesn't use very many tempo schemes. There's a ton of them out there, by the way. What's up, Alexia? How are you? It's good to see you.
Good morning. Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to be in the camera. My hair is all messed up.
Oh, no sweat, no sweat. So that's how we often lift out, and you can see, look how everybody's putting just the 3 number. A lot of people don't use that 4 number one, but you'll notice when it comes to tempos, a lot of times people use like 3-1-1. That's a very popular tempo. That's very popular with ACSM actually for hypertrophy or muscle growth. So 3-1-1, and then this would also be 1. So it'd actually be 3-1-1-1. What that is it's a slow eccentric. 1, 2, 3, 1 second pause, 1 second lift, 1 second pause, 1, 2, 3. Very popular with like ACSM. Now, NASM is typically going to use these 3 tempos. You're going to see X, X, X. Actually, let's go in order here. We're going to see 4, 2, 1, or we could say 4, 2, 1, 1. 2, 0, 2, or we would see 2, 0, 2, 0, or we would see X, 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 which is X, 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 X. So in the 4-number version, we'll have like at the most like a 1 second pause between reps. NASM really kind of wants to kind of get through these things. But generally, these are the 3 tempos, okay? So this one here is going to be associated with stabilization. Okay, so that one's going to be for when we're trying to teach our client how to do an exercise properly and stabilize. That's going to be huge. If we are trying to teach our client how to get strong, well, if we're trying to teach our client how to build like muscle size, this is very good for strength, endurance / hypertrophy. That is too big for me to be able to fit. I did not give myself enough room. I gotta move this whole thing. All right. Yeah. Yeah. And there we go. So if you're going for like strength, but still like plenty of endurance, or, which is obviously very good for sports, or if you're going for hypertrophy, like medium strength, but not like maximum strength, then that 2-0-2 tempo is going to serve you really well. Or if you are going for maximum strength or power, then you're going to go with the XXX tempo, max strength / power. So these tempos here are the 3 that are listed in your textbook. NASM doesn't really go beyond that. XXX just means that it needs to be as explosive as possible. You shouldn't be doing X2X, which would be this, You're not holding your pauses. NASM wants you to go explosive in all of it, right? That's XXX. My lengthening was fast, my shortening was fast, my isometric was really fast, or at least it should have been. If I'm going for hypertrophy, remember, hypertrophy is all about like building up lactic acid, right? We want to make as much lactic acid as possible so that we create as much cellular damage as possible. As much cellular damage is going to result in the most inflammation and growth. So that's going to look like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's the medium tempo. I'm not taking any pauses. Because I'm not pausing, I don't let lactic acid have any time to leave. I'm generating as much of it as possible. And that's what we like there. ACSM disagrees. ACSM thinks 3-1-1 works the best. A little bit of a longer eccentric, little tiny pause isn't going to hurt you, and a little bit of a faster concentric lift. I don't hate that tempo, but it's not in your textbook. You guys are here to pass your NASM, so I don't want you to remember it. Which is why we're not writing it down. So that is exercise tempos in a nutshell. And those are the 3 types of contractions that you've got: eccentric lengthening, isometric stabilization, and concentric shortening. So next thing we're going to see, we got to talk about, if we're going to understand strength well, we have to understand all the various ways that we can measure strength. So there's a couple different methods out there. This is not one that you are going to see in most gym settings, but there's a really cool little piece of equipment called a tensiometer, where there's a little cable that will go through here and here and here, and it goes like this. And it can actually measure how much tension you're generating as you like squeeze a muscle. So you would ask someone to exert force and hold that force for about 5 seconds. Really good for measuring your isometric strength. So doctors' offices will sometimes use this and things like that. It's not bad. They're asking you to hold something at a specific angle isometrically. Not bad. Pretty good way to measure isometric strength. There's also what is called a dynamometer. You can buy one of these, by the way. They're not that expensive. If you want to become like a rock climber, or if you want to if you want to get into rock climbing, or if you want to become like a grip specialist, those are the really expensive ones. Where's the cheapo plastic one? Yeah, no. Where's the hammer? There we go. 45 bucks. I guess it's still kind of expensive. There we go. 35 bucks. Anyway, they're not that bad. There's one that's 350 from Wish. Yeah, from Wish. So anyway, they're kind of cool. If you're going to train a lot of people to work on their grip and stuff, this is just a cool thing that measures how hard you can squeeze. And what's fun about this, we actually do know that grip strength is one of the things that has been shown to be tied directly towards long life. People with the strongest grip tend to live the longest. Now, here's what I will say about that. I do think that that's kind of an example of, when you hear that statistic where people say it's like, oh, well, the average age during the dark ages was like 30 years, we didn't think people were ever going to live this long. For the record, that statistic doesn't really work that way. It's the average drops because there were a lot of like childhood deaths back during the dark ages. So it throws the average down. If you made it to your teens, you were likely to live to about 67 years old, just like we are today. Not a huge difference there. but that factoid gets misconstrued a little bit. I think the grip thing is a similar thing. People are like, oh, so all I need to do is train my grip and then I'll live longer. No, people who exercise regularly have stronger grips. Exercising regularly helps you live longer. So I think that fact is misconstrued. They used to put that in my book. I showed you my old textbook yesterday, my 3rd edition. That was a little like factoid that was in there, and I think is often misunderstood. This picture shouldn't be on this slide. Now, the last one that's probably the most relevant to us, the type of strength testing that you're actually going to do is probably 1 rep max testing. Let's put a picture in here. I don't normally modify the PowerPoints, but I'm not gonna do this. What am I doing? So 1 rep max testing is probably the most common type of strength test that will actually be like applicable to you guys, right? And to your clients, right? So this is the maximum amount of weight, the maximum amount of force, the maximum amount of strength that someone has, right? And obviously we want to make sure that we do this properly and safely. And so what you're going to do is you're going to warm your client up, and then you're going to just throw more and more and more weight on the bar until eventually they're going to get a fail rep. You're going to help them put it back. And whatever number they got, that was their 1 rep max. If you don't want to train somebody, if you're worried about like having it be a really extreme amount of weight, or if you're worried about injuring your client, you can also have them do like an 8 rep max or a 10 rep max even. That's a pretty high, but the further you get away from 1, the less accurate it gets. But then you can do a little bit of fancy math and figure out the 1 rep max. And that's why we have calculators out there. We have like 1 rep max conversion calculators. So like if you had a client that you were worried about, let's say they did 100 pounds and they were able to do, you are like, man, I want to know what your 1 rep max is, but I'm nervous about like you injuring yourself if I make you literally lift at your 1 rep max. So let's do an 8 rep max. So if they did 100 pounds for 8 reps, their 1 rep max is about 124 pounds. So there's a little bit of fancy math that we can do. Those calculators are available online. You can also find a table in your textbook that'll have it all listed in like a big old table that you can kind of use. Just download the app. It's way easier. But I use that all the time. Like today, my roommate was doing a military press this morning, and I didn't know. Usually when we've done military presses, we've done a lot of high rep training until now, but he wants to get a little bigger lately and for the new year. And so I was like, all right, well, let's lift a little bit heavier. So I needed to know what his 6 rep max was. And I've never done 6 reps with him before. And I didn't want to take the time to have to do a ton of 1 rep max testing. So I took his other number, which was his 12 rep max, threw it into the calculator, and came out with his number for 6. And so it worked really well. And it was close. He got to his 4th set and he was like, that was a little easy. So next week we'll go up by 5 pounds and see if that's right. So that is the different ways to measure strength. Now, when it comes to developing strength, we also have a lot of tools here, right? In the same way that we have a lot of tools to measure, and really we apply one of them the most, there's also a lot of ways to develop strength, right? Because there's 3 types of contractions, one of the ways that you can develop a little bit of strength is by training for your isometric strength, right? So training that involves this like sustained contraction over a period of time. That's why we have several isometric exercises out there in your textbook, right? We've got the plank, you can do a wall sit. Like I said, we could do a handstand. You could do like a single leg squat with like a little pause at the bottom, just hold the pause at the bottom. Lots of isometric stuff out there, and that's great. But I will say, when it comes to gaining isometric strength, you kind of only get good at that very specific position you are holding. Isometric strength doesn't translate to a lot of concentric or eccentric strength. They're just very different. So instead, what we tend to focus on, probably the most common type of strength training that we talk about is going to be what we call progressive resistance training, which is just your standard training that you're probably thinking of in your head when you think of like strength gains, right? It's a method of increasing your muscle's ability to generate force by making things a little bit heavier week to week, month to month, whatever, right? It's a continued progression of resistance. So progressive resistance training would be where my roommate does like 60 pounds today, 65 pounds next week, 70 pounds the week after that, so on and so forth, right? So that's the progressive resistance style. Now, there are some fancy methods out there for gaining strength as well. You've probably seen variable resistance training if you've ever watched a video on that. Variable resistance training is often done on a special machine. So what you'll see is like a machine, not shopping. Oh, that's going to show us the expensive machine. Oh, actually, oh, it's showing on. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So you'll see what's called like an isokinetic machine. And basically what it does, it gives you a different amount of resistance as you move through. And you can kind of see like the cam is awkwardly shaped instead of being like a perfect circle the way it normally would be. Perfect circle would give you an even amount of resistance the entire time. This awkward little like bean shape is going to give you more resistance in certain sections than others. Seems kind of weird. Why would you do that? Well, if you have a client who is having a little bit of trouble with like a sticking point in one of their lifts, variable resistance training can be a good way to sort of work through that, right? So for instance, a lot of people in a barbell squat will have trouble transitioning from the up to the down. And so they need a little bit more resistance. So what you'll do is you'll do variable resistance training. Now, these machines are rare. We don't see too many of them. You saw how hard it was for me to kind of Google it. Oftentimes, the classic version of variable resistance training is using like a resistance band. So like a resistance band, which is like literally like a rubber band, right? What happens to a rubber band the further you stretch it out? It pulls harder back, right? So if you did, whoops. There we go. So if you did like a resistance band, oh, come on, ads. I don't know what this is. That's funny. Something like this with like a band, right? It's a little easier as you go down. The exercise gets easier. And then as you come up, it gets harder because the band is pulling harder. Now, there are like ways to attach resistance bands to like a barbell plate as you're doing it. And that's a way to make it harder. You'll also see people use chains in the gym, these big, super heavy chains. It's obnoxious when someone's doing it because it's so freaking loud. But there's the band, right? You can see he's doing a deadlift. It gets heavier as he goes up. Same thing is true with the chains, right? It gets lighter as he goes down because the chains aren't hitting anymore, and it gets heavier on the way up. So that's variable resistance training. It is heavier in some part of the lift than others. It's not bad. But that's a very good example. There's also, and by the way, I'm not saying any of these are the end all be all way to do it. I'm not saying you have to do these things, but let's say you have a client who hit a really hard plateau and they need to change things up. This is a tool at your disposal that can help them get like a little bit of variety to make things harder. And by the way, guys, it is brutal. I've done it one time and I was like, oh, never again. Did not love that. That is a confidence killer. Next one we got is isokinetic machines. Like I said, that can be an example of variable, but isokinetic is where you'll see people actually, they got to strap you in to the machine. It's kind of funny, you have to wear like a seatbelt and a strap and stuff because your body will basically raise off the chair if you don't. And what this does is this machine gives you a very perfect equal amount of resistance in whatever section we want it to be in. So if we want it to be equal the entire time, the machine can do that. So you'll be trying to contract and it forces you to go at one constant pace. That's what this is often used for. It's very good for physical therapy. It's very good for rehab when you're trying to retrain the nervous system after an injury. But in a typical gym setting, probably not very applicable. And then the last thing we've got is plyometric training. So plyometric training, AKA very explosive tempos, very explosive lifts. You know, if you're lifting XXX or XXX over here, right? That is a very good example of a plyometric. So this is very good for enhancing your body's power production. It actually can do this through what is called the myotactic stretch reflex. Basically, that is where your body will experience, it kind of panics a little bit, actually. You contract your muscle, you lengthen eccentrically your muscle so fast, your nervous system goes, whoa, we just stretched out really quickly. And so it thinks that you're going to tear the muscle. So what it'll do is it'll contract as a protective mechanism. Meanwhile, you're like, perfect, that's what I wanted to do anyway. So then you're contracting, so you get a little bit of a more explosive reaction. Like if I wanted to explosively throw something, it would actually be more beneficial for me to go like that. I'm going to be much more explosive going this way because I was very explosive going this way. And my nervous system is going to go, whoa, we don't want to tear the pecs. So it'll contract really explosively. We call that a stretch shortening cycle. I know a lot of you guys are very familiar with that. So it's your inherent sort of neuromuscular response. We take advantage of that when we do plyometrics. So plyometrics are very, 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 very explosive exercises meant to be done at an XXX tempo. That means as fast as possible. So there's a stretch reflex right there. He jumps up, right? Does not pause, jumps down, and then jumps again. When he hits the ground, that's going to cause his muscles to lengthen, and then he's going to rebound and jump as high as he can afterwards. That's a perfect plyometric. This is called a box jump to depth jump. Depth jump is going from high to low, or from high to low, back to high, and then jump high again. And then the box jump part is going from low to high. So a box jump to depth jump is doing both. Now, when it comes to strength training, we know that our body loves to plateau. I'm sure everybody in this call right now has been stuck in some type of plateau at some point in their training cycle. It happens to everybody. It happens to the best of us. One of the things that we can do to sort of prevent plateauing is training our body in different ways. And this is where the concept of what we call periodization comes in. So periodization is a way for us to systematically organize our training intensities over a specific time period. So what this does is we're trying to raise the intensity of our training, lower the intensity of our training, try out circuit training, maybe try plyometric. We're going to vary up the acute variables as they come into our client. And by doing this, we are going to shorten the phases of our training because our body is going to go, oh, crap, we're doing something new. Oh no, I'm bad at it. I need to adapt. I need to get stronger. So then your body goes through an adaptation period. And before it gets fully used to it, and it's at the end, it's like, all right, I feel like I got this mastered. We do something new. And your body's like, come on, man. And then it has to like keep training, has to keep developing. So this is where you will see when it comes to periodization, we will go through different like cycles of training, right? And so you can kind of see it might look something kind of like this, where we also give our body a little bit of time off to recover, right? So we're working on our strength. Let's take a little bit of rest so that we don't tear a muscle. Working on our strength. We're higher than we've ever been. Let's recover a little bit. And then we work our way up. So you can see it's like we see sort of a gradual increase, right? It makes these, kind of dips as you get fatigue, and then your body recovers. And so your body gets up and goes beyond, and then dips again. And, because training is stress, right? Training is muscle damage. So because you're damaging things, that's going to cause a decrease. If you continue to try to do something and it's unsustainable, it's going to fall and flatten off. So we start training a new way, and then suddenly our body adapts, and then and so we're just going to kind of go through those cycles. NASM likes to do this using an annual plan. And so you will take your client through various styles of training over the course of like a year's time, right? And that's how we lay out our periodization. So I might start my client with the foundational basic stuff where I'm working in the stabilization level. I'm going to do a 4-2-1 tempo that month. I'm going to lift at only 50 to 70% of their 1 rep max. I'm going to, be pretty gentle to them. And I'm going to pick very unstable versions of exercises. I'm probably not going to do a bench press. I'm probably going to do a cable chest press. Probably not going to do a barbell squat. I'm probably going to do like a single leg squat where they have to balance. And so then the next month, now I can work on their strength. So let's say my client wants to get bigger. So we focus more on hypertrophy after that. We call that phase 3. That's the muscle growth section, right? They're trying to get big. Cool. Well, there we go. Now I'm lifting at a 2-0-2 tempo. I'm probably doing a little bit less reps. Instead of being somewhere between 12 and 20 reps, now I'm between 6 and 12, which means my intensity has to go up. It went from like 50 to 70% of their 1 rep max up to like 75 to 85% of their 1 rep max. So I'm changing up the training variables, and now the body's like, oh God, we just got used to the other one. And it has to keep adapting, right? And then let's say they want to get strong. So then I take them into like the max strength phase, where they're going to lift like 85 to 100% of their 1 rep max. They're only going to do 1 to 5 repetitions. I'm going to increase their rest periods, right? And then my tempo is going to they're going to try to be as explosive as possible. They're going to lift really heavy and very explosively. Now, at the end of that, their body is really stressed out. That was a lot of work, right? So I need to take them back and restart the cycle. So it might look something like this over the course of a year. So, I let them go back to stabilization. Their joints and tendons and ligaments have time to kind of, recover and adapt. And we repeat the cycle. So that way the body really never has time to get used to things, right? And it really has never time, and it doesn't have any time to sort of plateau. Does that make sense, guys? Anybody have any questions so far? Everybody feeling good?
Feeling good.
All right, love it.
I'm feeling pretty good. So when you're trying not to plateau, you just want to switch things up, and you want to. Is there anything else we could do like besides that to prevent? Well, not to prevent plateauing, but more like dealing with it.
It depends on what type of plateau you're dealing with. Strength plateaus, they're going to kind of respond to what I just said.
Right.
That's kind of the best way to do it. Weight loss plateaus or weight gain plateaus, you can also change up your diet.
Okay.
I've even had people change. So like I did a new routine, didn't really have much effect. Changed up their diet a little bit, didn't have much effect. Tried out intermittent fasting and then pushed their workouts to the evening. Totally changed everything, right? And then eventually they plateaued again and we just went back to their old style and there we go. So, that was the very rare times that I've had like a bodybuilder client. But that's like sometimes changing up other variables can be very effective.
Okay.
And I'm not even a big fan of intermittent fasting, but I was like, let's try this,
Right. See what sticks and what works, right? Because everybody reacts differently to different things. So you just got to try it.
Yep. This is why, and you guys are going to get so tired of me talking like this. When we get to nutrition, so many questions are going to be like, is this good? Is this good? And I'm not going to answer any of them with, yeah. It'll be like, well, it depends. It's like, what about this? It depends. What about that? It depends. So I think the same thing is true of plateaus. Okay. So whenever we're talking about strength, we got to kind of talk a little bit about a special type of strength, which is known, which we're going to call power, right? So one of the things that does affect your strength is also your ability to develop power. So what power is a little bit different than strength. Strength is just force production, getting something from point A to point B. That's it. Doesn't matter how fast it happens. You just need to get it from point A to point B. That's strength, right? Remember, we defined it as your muscle generating internal tension to overcome an external force. So if it's able to just do that, great, there's your strength, right? Power, on the other hand, is a little bit of strength where it is force production, but it is also how fast you can do that force production. So power is where we're going to take strength and we're going to multiply it by velocity. That's going to give us our power. So muscular power is the combined factors of speed plus strength, or speed plus force production. So force is the amount of tension generated by the muscle. Velocity is the speed of the contraction. Another way to say this is we call this the rate of force production. That's another way to kind of lay this out, right? So if I produce 10 pounds of force at a velocity of 10 miles per hour, my overall power output is 10 times 10. So that's doing 100 units of power, right? And these are all just fake numbers right now. Let's say I generate 15 pounds of force, but my force production was so high that my velocity had to drop, and I traveled at half the speed by adding 50% force. So now that's going to be 15 times 5. Actually, I did my math wrong here. Wait, yeah. No, I didn't. 15 times 5 is going to be 75 units of power. I lost power by lifting too heavy, right? So NASM wants you to maximize your power output by combining the best of both worlds. You are going to have one exercise that trains you for force and another exercise that trains you for velocity. So when we talk about like the power level of the OPT, which we haven't really talked too much about just yet, you know, when we get down to this phase 5 here, which is the end of the OPT model, you know, the top of the staircase, right? When we're all about power, which is all about rate of force production, you're actually going to do a superset technique for all of your muscles. You're not just going to do a barbell squat, and you're not just going to do squat jumps. You're going to put the two together. So I would do a really heavy barbell squat. That's going to be really good for my force production. I'm going to rack it. I'm going to step off the squat rack, and I'm going to do a couple like squat jumps, and that's going to work on my velocity. So now I'm working on force and velocity simultaneously. I'm raising both parts of the equation, and that's going to give me an overall power output, which is going to be really great if I'm an athlete. I'm trying to learn how to dunk a basketball. I talk to people all the time. They're like trying to learn how to dunk. And they're like, I jump and I jump and I jump and I jump, and I'm just not getting any higher. And it's like, well, you're working on the velocity, but you need to go do some heavy barbell squats. You need to go do some heavy lifting so you can get stronger and increase your force output. Because right now you're only increasing your velocity output. And then sometimes it goes the other way too. People will be like, I'm lifting heavy, it's not working. It's like, well, you gotta do your velocity, you know, gotta put them together. So when we're talking about this output, this power output, this force output, we're talking about both of the heavy lifting and the really explosive lifting. What that's going to result in, that's really good, a really good way to train your muscles to develop a higher percentage of type 2 muscle fibers. So remember, type 2 muscle fibers are the big, strong ones, particularly type 2X, right? The really, truly fast twitch, explosive ones that don't have very much endurance. So in training for maximum strength, that's phase 4 of the OPT, or power, which is phase 5 of the OPT, we are primarily focusing on type 2X fibers. Whereas like if my client was working in hypertrophy, they're going for muscle growth, or if they're going for like a little bit of strength endurance, relatively heavy, but still a goodly amount of endurance, we would be focusing more on type 2A muscle fibers. And if my client's in stabilization, which is just a very high number of reps, that's very much going to be type 1 muscle fibers. All of them are good. I don't think one is better than the other. I think that they are just different goals. So when we're talking about like explosive, really heavy resistance training, we're going to be looking at 3 things that are going to happen inside of our nervous and muscular systems. Number one thing we're going to see is an increased amount of motor unit recruitment. So you remember earlier I said the way your nervous system works is it starts, you know, it starts by recruiting your smallest motor units first. If it doesn't get the job done, it'll recruit a larger one, and then a larger one, and a larger one, until eventually it's recruiting your maximum fastest you know, muscle fibers, right? So it starts with the little ones and then it just increases it. Actually, there we go. There's a weird graph here, but you can see if I'm lifting at 1 to 5 reps, I'm using my biggest motor unit. So if I'm lifting at like 12 to 20, I'm using my smallest motor units, right? So based on that physiology, we know that if we are trying to increase our explosiveness, we need to recruit as many motor units as possible. I need you to lift heavy, right? And that makes sense. I mean, it translates instantly. You're like, okay, great. I need to get stronger. I need to lift heavy, right? But this is the reason why in the background, right? It's because of a greater number of motor units being recruited to contract as many muscle fibers as possible. You won't recruit as many muscle fibers as possible if you don't lift heavy. Another thing we're going to see is your motor unit firing rate. So how fast your motor units can trigger your muscle fibers to contract. What's kind of funny is your body, one of the ways that your body regulates the strength of contraction is how fast the muscles actually contract. So like a slow nervous system is going to result in a contraction that's relatively weak. So it's like the difference between this zap, 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 right? Electricity, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, versus an electric signal like this. Right, that's going to be a much stronger contraction. So we call that rate coding. So your motor unit's firing at a faster frequency, therefore creating a stronger contraction. That's one of the ways that we increase power output. So how do you do that? Well, you need to lift explosively as fast as possible. So you go from like doing nothing to zapping your muscles really, 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 really fast. And that'll create a really explosive contraction. Also, the last thing that's going to give us a lot of increased power is motor unit synchronization. So your motor units firing all at once, working together rather than working against one another. So let's say, how many people got in this call? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, we just lost somebody. We lost Alexia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right now, right? So let's say we divide the room into Dion plus Joseph plus Simon, and we divide the other half of the room at Arlene, David, and Chris. And you guys are going to have a tug of war, right? And what's going to happen is one side of that tug of war is going to be really organized, and the other side of the tug of war, unfortunately, is not going to be as organized. So the one side that is very organized, the person at the end, they're the anchor, right? They're going to go 1, 2, 3, pull, 1, 2, 3, pull, 1, 2, 3, pull, right? And what's going to happen is all 3 people are going to go 1, 2, 3, pull, and then they're going to kind of fix their grip for a second, get their core tight, get ready, 1, 2, 3, pull, and then they're going to pull really hard, get ready for the next one, 1, 2, 3, pull, right? They're going to be really, really organized. Everybody's giving their maximal effort at the same time. The other group, they're just going to pull as hard as they can, right? And then all of a sudden I start to get a little bit tired, so I need to redo my grip, right? And meanwhile, while I'm redoing my grip, the person in front of me just pulled as hard as they can. And then they need to redo their grip. And now, as they're redoing theirs, I'm pulling as hard as I can. So because we're like not in sync with one another, we're not going to make as much progress. So one of the ways that you're going to increase your strength, you need to make sure that you are increasing motor unit synchronization. All of the motor units are firing at the same time rather than out of sync with one another, right? So motor unit synchronization is all motor units firing in sync with one another, creating as efficient as a contraction as possible. How do you do that? You need to take long rest periods. So you know what's fun about ATP recovery? You get literally about 90% of your ATP recovered in 60 seconds. That's most of your energy. So like, but we go from like taking 60-second rest periods in the OPT model to taking 3 to 5 minutes. So you're telling me that the last 10% of my ATP, like I depleted all my ATP, I recovered 90% of it in 60 seconds. And you're telling me that the last 10% took another 2 minutes, double the amount of time it took me to get 90%? Probably not. But we take 3 to 5 minutes of rest sometimes. And the reason we do that is because it gives your, you know, when you're done lifting really heavy, your nervous system's like, right? It's just like ready for the next fight. It's going crazy. So we need to take time for your nervous system to calm down, get the system reset, and then we can turn everything on all at once, rather than some of those guys, you know, continuing to fire when we're trying to rest. So now you're starting to see how the rules came to be when we look at our rules for a client who's working in the power phase or in the max strength of the OPT. They're going to lift really heavy. That's 85 to 100% of their 1 rep max. They're going to try to lift really fast. That's really good for the motor unit firing rate. And they're going to take very, very, very long rest periods so they can reset the system in between each set. That's going to help with the synchronization. Does that make sense, everybody? Any questions on that?
Not yet.
All righty, love that. Cool. So, all right. So now, next thing we're going to look at is our adaptations. So, what are the ways that you can gain strength? Well, I told you earlier, there's an OPT model. So NASM broke it down into 5 ways. There's stabilization, endurance, hypertrophy, max strength, power, right? Let's take a look at some of these adaptations. So some of the adaptations are neural adaptations, increasing your strength and power without necessarily increasing your size. Or maybe you're just increasing your body's ability to recruit all of the muscles surrounding in a complete area. You know, we call that like a force couple, like multiple muscles being recruited simultaneously to kind of control one joint. That would increase your proprioception. That's going to increase your stabilization. That's going to hold your body in the correct position that we wanted it, right? Well, there's also like just making your muscles bigger, you know, like, so neural adaptations are related to strength and power and also related to stabilization. So that's really 2 adaptations in one, if you ask NASM. So that's the stabilization level, and that's the strength and power levels. Now there's also hypertrophy, right? There's also just like making your muscles bigger, right? Enlargement of muscle fibers are going to come from 2 places. Either you are going to see an increased number of myofibrils, that's the rods running through the muscles, or you're going to see an enlargement of the muscle fibers because there is more actin and myosin and more cellular fluid. If you fill up your muscles with more fluid, they'll be puffier, making them much better at producing energy, which is great, but like, you know, it's going to produce way more lactic acid. So that's the hypertrophy side of things. And then there's also power increases, and power increases, oops, there's hypertrophy. Power increases are coming from the greater levels of like force production and the nervous system knowing how to like utilize an actual stretch shortening cycle. So those are sort of the different ways that we get stronger. Like I said, NASM has taken all of that and organized it into a staircase for you to work your way up. We work on stabilization first, so increasing proprioception, learning how to use the muscles properly. Then we learn how to use the muscles over a greater length of time because a lot of people need that endurance. Then we start working on like a little bit of muscle size, increasing the glycolysis so that we can produce more lactic acid. Then we make more myofibrils in max strength, and we increase the nervous system's ability to recruit all those myofibrils in power. So that's a really good way to sort of create a well-rounded athlete by working them all the way up the OPT. Obviously, I've been saying it since this class started, we do want to be specific. If we are training like an athlete, you kind of don't want to be good at everything, as weird as that sounds. You kind of want to be good at your area. So you don't have to use all the phases of the OPT model, but for a general, just overall, generally athletic person, all the phases work pretty well. Now, also one other thing, there is a little bit of what's called hyperplasia. This is pretty rare in humans. It happens, but it's not something that we sort of directly train for. And this is actually an increase in the number of muscle cells you have. Resistance training doesn't really do that. This happens due to like cellular growth, just like, you know, your body getting older. We experience a lot of hyperplasia when we're, you know, becoming adults. But hyperplasia is making more muscle cells. You don't really do that. You make more muscle fiber, or muscle fibers are muscle cells. You make more fibers within your muscle cells, more myofibrils, more actin, more myosin. We do that. That's hypertrophy. But hyperplasia is making more of the cells. That's not something that we really do. And for the most part, the number of cells you have today are going to be the number of cells you have tomorrow. And you can change their shape and size. Now, obviously, doing all this training is going to have an unwanted byproduct, which is muscle soreness. Your body is going to experience inflammation in response to the training. That inflammatory response is very, very painful. And it's where your body is going to help you develop a resistance to all the damage that you've been creating during your workout. So damage to the myofibrils is going to result in mostly type 2 muscle fibers. So then type 2 fibers are going to make more glycolysis and more myofibrils within. So you're going to have more rods, more proteins, and you're going to have more fluid to be able to create the energy necessary to run those proteins. Now, I did say you're also going to experience some other adaptations when you perform strength training, which is to increase your cardiovascular system as well. Obviously, not quite as efficiently as all the cardio stuff we talked about yesterday, but your increase is still going to increase. Your heart rate is still going to increase, was what I meant to say, which is going to help with increasing your stroke volume. Your heart's going to contract a whole bunch. So then I'll go, all right, well, I guess I'll get stronger and pump blood a little bit better without necessarily getting larger, which is great. Your VO2 max will increase your ability to have more mitochondria within your cells, and will increase your body's ability to extract oxygen from your blood. And we will see a decrease in cholesterol, because you're actually going to be converting those cholesterols into hormones and testosterones and things like that to help you build muscle, which is really great. And both men and women are going to do that. So your stroke volume is going to result in an increased Q. That's your cardiac output, number quotient of blood pumped by your heart per minute, and your VO2 max. That's great, And then, like I said, you're going to be converting cholesterol into hormones, which will help you with your overall strength development, right? So that's all of the strength gaining side of understanding muscles. Do we have any questions on any of that? Cool. All right, so I got a video to show you guys to summarize everything we just kind of talked about. All right, so here's a little video that's going to kind of explain everything for you. I may have showed this video in class before. I don't think so, but maybe.
Hey, what's up guys, it's Matt with the Movement System. In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and myofibrillar hypertrophy. And we're going to talk about specific training variables and some myths that are surrounding this topic. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Okay, so to lay the groundwork, muscle is composed of about 70% myofibrillar proteins, 20% sarcoplasmic proteins, and 10% mitochondrial proteins. Theoretically, I can shift this ratio. So I'm just using that 70% to 20% as a pretty rough estimate for the average population. But let's just say that theoretically, I can increase the sarcoplasmic proteins a little bit more than I can increase the myofibrillar proteins based on training decisions. Okay, so now knowing some numbers as a baseline, let's move into the theory a little bit and actually discuss what's going on here. So we know that bodybuilders produce less force with the same cross-sectional area of muscle than powerlifters do. This is actually really well documented in research, and we can see that bodybuilders produce about 2/3 the amount of force as a powerlifter at the same size. So at this point you may be thinking, okay, well then the powerlifter obviously has more myofibrillar proteins because those are our contractile proteins. Those are the actin and myosin that are actually producing the force, whereas the sarcoplasmic proteins are expanding cell volume without necessarily increased force production. That's the theory. But here's one missing piece, and that is the neuromuscular adaptation. So we know that powerlifters train with very heavy loads and with high force activities. So on the force velocity curve, they're very far up at the top on the force end in terms of their training. So this really does need to be considered when we're looking at the difference in force output of bodybuilders and powerlifters. And based on my research, this is actually the more significant role is the neuromuscular adaptation than the difference in myofibrillar versus sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Now, both of these should work in combination, meaning that if a bodybuilder is specifically concerned about size, they're not going to necessarily do high force training, and they're not necessarily going to be worried about maximal loads on the bar. Rather, they're going to be thinking about volume and the potentially higher testosterone response from higher volume training and things like that. Whereas a power lifter who's most concerned about their Wilks or their weight to strength ratio, they need to actually be maximizing strength and force output at a minimal body weight. So that powerlifter is going to make strategic decisions in training to maximize force output for those neuromuscular adaptations and potentially get a little bit more myofibrillar hypertrophy from that type of training as well. So I don't think that these are necessarily independent and you could focus on one or the other, but it kind of goes hand in hand that when you're doing that high force training, you are also doing the type of training that may stimulate a little bit more on the myofibrillar hypertrophy side. Thinking back to the bodybuilder, we also have to consider the energy system, and bodybuilders using that 8, 10, 12, 15 reps range are going to be typically using a little bit more of that anaerobic glycolysis pathway. They're going to be causing more local metabolic acidosis, potentially relying a little bit more on the cardiovascular pathways, the capillaries into the muscle, and needing more of those sarcoplasmic and mitochondrial protein to be building and increasing in order to actually facilitate the type of training they're doing. So doing that type of training, they actually may be prioritizing that 30%, that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and mitochondrial protein growth just by the type of training that they're doing. So because of the relationship between anaerobic metabolism and sarcoplasmic proteins, there probably is some preferential sarcoplasmic hypertrophy for that higher rep bodybuilder style training. To what extent, we really don't know, and there needs to probably be more research to actually clarify the extent to which those sarcoplasmic versus myofibrillar hypertrophies can be prioritized, but that probably does occur to some extent. It's not the entire mechanism that is causing the difference between bodybuilders and powerlifters in terms of force output. A lot of that is neurophysiological in the actual strength of the neurons, the motor neurons that are going from the brain down to the muscles. But in combination, those two things are in fact resulting in that difference in the force output of a bodybuilder being about 2/3 the force output of an equally sized powerlifter. All right, guys, so that's the science. I hope that helps you understand and make training decisions. If this has been helpful for you, go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe for more videos like this. I'll definitely be doing follow-up.
So that's going to kind of explain a little bit about like how that muscle growth happens, right? Just like we had pulled up on the whiteboard at Sochi, right? We see there's a little bit of a difference. If you got a muscle cell, that's this big, another one over here that's like this big. You got and you got another one over here. It's that big. So here's like sort of the difference, right? You can see here's our original muscle cell, right? And we'll put 4 little proteins in here. Right now, if you just kept the same number of proteins and put them in here, but the cell is obviously bigger, we know there's just more cellular fluid over here. But if you make more contractile proteins, and that's the reason the cell is so much larger, then this is training for hypertrophy, right? And this is training for strength, which we would translate into what is called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. There's more sarcoplasm, right? There's more fluid. Crap. And over here, we have myofibrillar hypertrophy. Okay, there is one last version of this, by the way, that we never spent enough time talking. And this is the original muscle. Now, obviously, you can also get a little bit of growth. I'm just going to take this and make it a little bit bigger. This is a third type of growth that we really don't spend too much time talking about. This is a little larger. And also, by the way, I would call this type 2A, and I would call this type 2X. And I was supposed to put this here.
Brad, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So the difference in the first building of muscle and the second building of muscle, is it because of a different type of athlete or is it because of different type of training? Like, is that genetic
I
or
think
is
those are
that
kind of, it's a little bit genetic. Oh, that's what you mean.
okay?
Yeah, that's, it's a little bit, I was like, those are kind of the same thing. No, they're not. Yeah, it's a little bit genetic.
Okay.
But it is very much based on your training. The more like you specifically train to lift heavy weight, your body goes, oh, we're lifting heavy weight. I need to get better at this. And then if you are lifting like relatively heavy weight, but like, and here's what we'll do. I'll make a couple extra proteins here. We'll see, because in sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, it's not like you're not getting, it's not like you're not getting any increase, right? Like you'll still see a little bit when you're training for hypertrophy, just not as much. Your body mostly gets bigger because of like making more cellular fluid. So like a lot of like sports athletes, right, are going to very much be type 2A because, they're getting strong. Like again, LeBron James is strong, but he has to like jog up and down a court constantly, right? So I would argue that that's a little bit more sarcoplasmic cell muscle growth. Whereas like you look at a football player who can lift like a lot more weight, I would argue that that's more like a little bit more myofibrillar. They're going to have less endurance, but they're going to be much stronger in the short term. Does that make sense?
It does, but it leads me to another question. So like, does diet and exercise cause them to gain more sarcoplasm?
Diet, maybe not so much. Exercise, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it more like endurance training that causes them to do that?
Medium endurance training. Remember, this is still like, let's look at our rep ranges here. This is still very much like 6 to 12 reps.
Okay.
Right. Whereas over here, this is like 1 to 5 reps.
Okay.
So that's honestly like the big difference, right? I would not call, and we'll add some more acute variables here. 6 to 12 reps, 60 seconds rest, about 60 seconds rest, right? Depending on who you ask. Center this up so my chart looks somewhat like I typed this out in something that's not Microsoft Paint. And then over here, this 1 to 5 reps, this is like they're taking 3 to 5
More rest.
minutes
Okay.
rest. So again, like, yeah, those are definitely very different athletes, that are resulting in very different types of strength.
But these two different types of athletes, like, do they start off at the same point? Like,
Probably,
can you
yeah.
have like two like John Doe at the same weight, same everything, same
Mhm.
measurements, train differently, and end up in these two places? Or
Yeah, it's going to depend on how you train them. If you took one of them to an island and train him for hypertrophy, took another one to an island and train him for like, powerlifting, yeah, they're going to train differently. That's the adaptation. In this version over here, in the strength version, your body was lifting really heavy loads in your training. So it was going, holy crap, we need more proteins because it can't contract any other way. And over here, you were taking somewhat limited rest. So your body was like, holy crap, we need more cellular plasma because that's where we do glycolysis. We do glycolysis in all this empty space. So this person can spit out energy faster and more often than this person over here, but this person can contract harder.
okay.
Yeah. Now there is one more. We got to put some mitochondria in here. I made this a little too big. So your mitochondria are the energy producers. I'm just going to put one in the original cell. This is an untrained person. Now, obviously, hypertrophy training will give us a little bit of mitochondria. It's not like you're not getting any, so maybe we'll just make that, a little bit. We'll put some extra ones in there. All right, they'll get a little bit of extra mitochondria. I have trouble fitting this on the other one. We'll put them here. All right, here they're really not getting too much, right? Now, this person over here who is an endurance athlete, right? let's say this is an endurance athlete doing very high repetition training. It's not like shoving more mitochondria into a cell isn't going to make it at least a little bit bigger. This is mitochondrial hypertrophy. But see how it didn't really puff up the muscle that much? Your mitochondria just aren't very big. This is going to be type 1 muscle. This is going to be like 12 to 20 reps with like limited rest. Okay. So that's our third person there. And they are just packing their muscle full of mitochondria so that they can do way more cardiovascular exercise. So they're going to be spitting out energy like crazy. And it made the muscle cell a little bigger, but like, you know, it's not exactly impressive in terms of muscle size compared to what we saw in these other versions of muscle growth, if that makes sense. So I would argue that that is the rare one, you know, because again, and the reason why like these don't work quite the way they work, right? Remember he said like most of a muscle cell is 70% myofibrils. So making more of those is going to result in a lot of growth. 20% of it was sarcoplasm. So increasing that will make it a little bit bigger. And then like 10% of it was mitochondria. So like if you double the mitochondria, it just doesn't increase the size very much because it was only 10% originally. So that's why this doesn't really make your muscle cells that much bigger, but you might be out there as a runner and be like, well, I've got, you know, pretty big legs. And it's like, yeah, you know, compared to an untrained person, absolutely, you know, in terms of, and I'm talking about size here, right? But your legs can go for days, you know, like that's kind of the difference. And that's why I made this one a little bit bigger, but not much bigger. So that's type 1, type 2A, type 2X, untrained. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's helping me connect the dots now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this was the missing piece. We don't talk about this one very often. Like when we're talking about hypertrophy, we look to the two good ones, you know. But this honestly really does kind of clear. It helps you see everything. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up with a little bit of talk about flexibility rather than just talking about muscle strength. We got to have flexibility. So we got a couple of working pieces within our muscles here. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because we're going to teach it much better next mod. But you've got 3 things in the muscle, not muscle cell, the muscle, right? And this is where your nervous system starts interacting with your muscular system. You are going to have what is called your muscle spindle. It's a little sensory organ that lives throughout the length of your muscle. So it runs around between your muscle cells. And it's part of your nervous system, even though it's running through your muscle. And basically, it's this little spindle that kind of coils around your muscle fibers. And when you stretch your muscle fibers out, the coil is going to move. And when you contract your muscle fibers, the coil is going to move. So it's sending a signal to your nervous system saying, hey, the muscle's at this length. Whoop, now it's at this length. Whoop, now it's at this length. Whoop, now we're at this length, right? So that's like what a muscle spindle does. That's going to work together with what's called a Golgi tendon organ, GTO, and that lives in the tendon of your muscles right here. So Golgi tendon organs, they live in this little white section there, and there's the connection to the neurons, right? Now, its job is to grip the bone, right, with the tendon, and it's sensing how much tension. Whoop, I'm losing my grip. Whoop, I'm really losing my grip. You know, like, and that's sensing, telling your nervous system how good of a grip your muscle has on the bone. If the tension's really high, you're about to rip off the bone, your nervous system's going to be freaking out. And then there's also joint receptors, and they live between our bones. They're there to sense like if there's a lot of pressure, accelerating or decelerating, you know, if the joint's moving very, very, very fast. So the muscle spindle lives throughout the muscle. The Golgi tendon organ lives in the tendon, and it all inserts onto the bone. Now, the anatomy that we're going to understand, that anatomy is going to help us understand how we train to develop our flexibility. So we're going to do, one of the ways that we can stretch is we can do what's called a static stretch. Static stretches are probably what you think of when you think of a stretch. It's the long, slow, big, long hold stretch, right? So it's a slow, long duration, very gentle stretch that gradually lengthens a muscle into a longer new resting position. A lot of people will hold this anywhere from 30 seconds up to 2 minutes. There's a type of yoga that holds stretches for like 4 to 8 minutes. It's wild. This primarily is going to rely on this physiologic process that we call autogenic inhibition. Now, when you pull a muscle from end to end, two things are going to happen. You're taking the muscle spindle and you're stretching it out. So then your brain goes, ah, we're going to tear, right? And meanwhile, you are also pulling on both ends of the tendons because the bone's getting pulled off. This bone is getting pulled off that bone, right? So now you're pulling on the tendon. So now you're increasing tension as well. And your Golgi tendon organs are going, now, if you hold that tension, you pull into that stretch position, you're like, oh, good, and you're just holding it for about 30 seconds. Your Golgi tendon organ is going to go, man, if we keep holding this tension, I'm going to rip off the bone. So what it will do is it goes, all right, I give up. Because what it's been doing until now, you guys know when you're doing a stretch, it kind of feels like you're trying to get out of that stretch, like the muscle's trying to contract to pull you the opposite way. Like if I'm, my hamstrings contract to pull me back up. Right. So if I'm like stretching my hamstrings, they're like, no, we want to go this way. And I'm like, no, you got to go this way. I'm trying to get more flexible, and your muscle is like, no, I want to go back to being short. I want to go back to being relaxed. Right. So you're just pulling it in. And so what your body will do in autogenic inhibition is that it is the process where the Golgi tendon organ will go, you know what? All right, fine. I give up. Let's fully relax the muscle. And so it will create an inhibitory effect on the muscle spindle. And it will tell the muscle spindle, hey, shut up, let go, let him stretch out. And then all of a sudden the muscle is able to get to a new full length. It takes about 30 seconds for that to kick in though. So you have to hold your stretches for a minimum of 30 seconds before it'll take any effect. And that's great because now you can train your nervous system to say, hey, this is the length I want my muscles to be. And that's how we increase our flexibility. Now, there's also what are called active isolated stretches. These are stretches that are performed by actually contracting a muscle. And you guys remember how I told you every muscle has an opposite. If you contract this muscle, the other one relaxes. If you contract this muscle, this one relaxes, right? Those are your antagonists. So when you contract one muscle, you're sending a signal to tell the other one to relax. So what if we did that for a certain number of repetitions? If I'm trying to get this side of my neck to relax, if I contract this side, right? Squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax. I am doing what's called reciprocal inhibition. I'm trying to get one muscle to reciprocate the other one by letting go. It's like, well, if you're going to keep using this, yeah, all right, I'll go. You can have your day. I'll let go. Like if I squeeze my bicep over and over, I'm stretching out my tricep, right? I'm fine. Yeah, you take it. And that's where you do about 5 to 10 repetitions. You only hold each rep for about 1 to 2 seconds. That's reciprocal inhibition. And then there are dynamic stretches. That's what we did in the gym the other night. This is just moving a muscle through a full range of motion. Now, active stretches can increase your flexibility. Static stretches can definitely increase your flexibility. Dynamic stretches, not really their job. In fact, if anything, this turns your muscle on because it creates that myotactic stretch reflex I talked about earlier. I rapidly stretch out my chest goes, whoa, and then it pulls back the other way. Turns the muscle on. This is really great if I want to lift very explosively in my chest. Love dynamic stretches if I'm trying to increase the explosiveness. Also, it does drive some blood into the muscle, which is really good to protect it. And it does increase my cardiac output, oxygen delivery, and helps with my energy systems. So I like it, but if I'm trying to improve my flexibility, this is not going to help my chest get more flexible. It's great if I'm lifting heavy, not so great for improved mobility. So a combination of them can be good. Now, there's one last type of stretch, and this is not found in your regular textbook. You will find this in your corrective exercise textbook. Mo is going to teach this to you much better than I am. But there is what is called PNF stretching, or proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, more commonly referred to as just neuromuscular stretching. It's way easier to say that. So this is actually stretching that typically requires a partner. You can do a couple of them on your own, like if you have like a strap, and you can just contract your arms and pull yourself into a position. But usually it requires a partner to actively stretch a participant. And this is a combination of static and active stretching together. So it's going to get the benefits of autogenic inhibition, where the Golgi tendon organ is telling the muscle to relax. And it's going to get the benefits of reciprocal inhibition, where the antagonist muscle is also telling the muscle to relax. And so what you're going to do is a partner will draw a muscle through its complete range of motion to the first point of compensation. They're going to look to where, they're going to keep stretching and stretching and stretching and stretching, and then something's going to happen where they compensate. Like if it was my hamstring, right? If I raise my hamstring up and up and up and up and up, eventually my knee is going to buckle. And when my knee buckles, I compensate it, right? Or my hip's going to raise up. Something's going to happen to cause like some type of compensation. That's where we stop. We go back, get it to where it's uncompensated, and we hold it there. So that's going to hold for about 20 to 30 seconds. There's your autogenic inhibition. Then you are going to instruct your client to contract that muscle and the antagonist. So they're going to do an isometric contraction for about 7 to 15 seconds. And that is going to create reciprocal inhibition. And then you're going to tell them to relax, and they should be able to go through a deeper range of motion after that. So you're going to take them back to a new, deeper range of motion, wait for them to compensate, back off just a little bit, and then you're going to hold that for another 20 to 30 seconds, and you're going to repeat that anywhere from 1 to 3 repetitions. So this is a table that you're going to find in your corrective exercise textbook, which will show you how to do it. So you stretch the client for 20 to 30 seconds. They contract for 7 to 15 seconds. You stretch them into a new range of motion for another 20 to 30 seconds. You repeat 1 to 3 sets of that. By the way, that's 1 to 3 contraction sets, which means 2 to 4 static holds, because you have like 1 extra static hold in the beginning. Now, there are some precautions. Don't do this with seniors who have like exceptionally tight muscles and weak tendons, because you could tear something. Don't do it with clients who have hypertension, because it's an isometric contraction. That's not so great. And then certain neuromuscular disorders, and don't do it if they've had a joint replacement in that joint. If they have an acute injury, don't do it. So many people stretch when they're injured, and then they're like, it makes me feel better. Feels better, it's not helping. When you're injured, rest and try to get active as soon as you can, strengthening the muscle. That will help you come back from it. People always stretch out their injuries, and it just makes it worse. You're taking something that you tore and then you're pulling it further. Don't do that. Arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, Arlene, I know you mentioned that earlier, not great for PNF stretching. Some of the joints might be okay, but be careful with them. And then osteoporosis, be cautious with that.
Is
So I
it
put
too
a
much
couple
stress on
examples
the
in here.
joints?
What's that?
I'm sorry. Is it too much stress on the joints?
Yeah, it can. It depends on if it's because remember, rheumatoid is just is an inflammatory response, so it's not even necessarily causing damage, but an autoimmune disorder, right, is where your body's freaking out kind of over nothing. We don't really fully understand why, but like your body freaks out over the smallest things. So now you stretch the muscle out. You didn't actually cause any damage, but your immune system thinks you did. So it goes, and it just makes it just makes inflammation.
Yeah, because I mean, I will go through like a whole workout, love it, not a problem, but my knees will be swollen for like 3 days.
Exactly. Yeah, that's rheumatoid arthritis.
Yep.
Rheumatoid arthritis. So osteoarthritis is where like you just kind of, you've knelt on your knees for too many years and the stuff's damaged. It's starting to rub, and now you get bone on bone. That's classic arthritis, right? Degenerative joint disease is what we often call it. Rheumatoid arthritis is your immune system attacking your body. Why? I don't know. Multiple sclerosis, same thing. It's also a autoimmune. We don't know how to fix that either. It's just an overly sensitive immune system, kind of like allergies in a way, where your body thinks the best thing to do is to cause inflammation and just shove extra tissue into the joint. So then you get all inflamed. It's very painful. So here's the PNF stretch for the lat. She stretches him, he contracts, she stretches him again. Here's the PNF for the pecs. Stretches, relax, stretches. Hamstrings, glutes, piriformis, adductors. I moved through that very quickly. We are going to practice that the next time I get to see you guys. So we're going to do a little demo on that. Like I said, it's not necessarily something you learn in your regular textbook, but I do think it's kind of fun and motivating to learn how to do it. So I do like doing it with you guys at least once in the journey. Mo will be the one to teach you that stuff. His workshops on that stuff are phenomenal. I love watching him explain PNF stretching. So that's all I got for you guys. There's my record button.
I have